Sometimes looking at data isn't enough. Looking at trends becomes really important. And the technology partner should be able to allow you to do that. And a lot of LIMS providers have not evolved to meet the needs of labs over the past 30 years. And the result is a heavily fragmented industry with customized solutions for specific testing methods, but not a one-size-fits-all approach that scales as the laboratory grows.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rick Danielson, the CEO of Danielson Applied Consulting, LLC, which is dedicated to providing its laboratory clients with quality information and service. I want to thank you today for joining the Confience webcast on the topic of enhancing global food safety, why the world needs a LIMS. Today, we'll be connecting with Wayne Verost, where we will dive into the role of laboratory information management systems, or LIMS, and the role they play in upholding safety and quality standards in food and the beverage industry. Backed by recent data, we'll discuss how laboratory and quality professionals serve as the first line of defense against emerging threats to our food supply, and how LIMS technology enhances their laboratory's ability to safeguard public health. Wayne Verost is the general manager at Confience. And Wayne, I want to welcome you to our show today.
Thanks a lot, Rick. It's a pleasure being here today.
Okay, so we're live. So, anything can happen. I'm in California. Things could start shaking at any moment. Who knows? But so we'll see. We'll see what happens.
At least we're not messing with the tornadoes today.
There you go. You don't have tornadoes today. That's excellent. Okay, I want to remind the audience that this session is being recorded, and even though your microphones are muted, we'll be checking the chat. So please drop your questions and comments in there. And if we don't get to the answers today, we will follow up with you at a later time. Okay. So Wayne, like I said, today we're talking about some of the primary issues that the food and beverage industry has been facing, especially in relation to recalls, and there were a number of recalls in 2023. Can you give us some insight as to why you were seeing such a surge in recalls in that industry?
Sure, Rick. Well, according to the U.S. Public Interest Research Education Fund, outbreaks linked to recall food products sickened about 1,100 people in 2023. Now, that same report released last month by the U.S. Public Research Group found that food and beverage recalls nationwide increased about 8% in 2023. Two of the biggest recalls involved lead-tainted cinnamon-flavored applesauce, and that sickened about 500 children nationwide. And cantaloupe contaminated with salmonella led to about 400 illnesses. Meat, poultry, egg recalls, according to the USDA, have reached the highest levels since before the COVID-19 pandemic. Modern tools now allow information to be disseminated whenever a problem occurs, so it's like 24-hour news. So as soon as things happen, you know about it quicker. So it could be a matter of more contamination, or just we're more aware of what's going on.
Right. And I know that a lot of state, local public health departments now are reporting directly to FDA. There are several networks that are now in place where communications are key in getting the word out quickly amongst the public health officials. So I think that's really helping. And that also helps when you have nationwide contamination events. And with all the modern technology of being able to identify some of these contaminants, they can compare very quickly to make sure that, to see if, in fact, these are related or if they're all just independent of one another. What do you think are some of the root causes and the spikes in these recalls?
Well, if you look at things like the lead-tainted applesauce, it could be a lack of oversight during the production process. But environmental lead contamination that ends up in plants can often enter the food supply. Also, things like use of fillers, colorants to make products appear of better quality or way more can contribute to it as well. Sometimes even there are economically motivated adulterations going on. Those things are intentional. With respect to something like the salmonella contaminated cantaloupe, melons grow close to the ground, and it's possible that the cantaloupes are exposed to bacteria from the soil or from animals or the water used for irrigation. Pathogens and microbes grow on the netted surface of fruit and are transferred into the flesh when you cut into it. So this is one of the reasons why it's really important to wash all fruit and produce before eating. Even if the manufacturer or the producer does the washing, things can happen during the transportation and packaging. So it's always good to do that. Contamination of
Right.
food products can also occur before harvest, during harvest, packaging, storing, and during the processing or preparation of cut products. So there's a lot of ways for these pathogens to be introduced to the products.
Right. And then you have, at the restaurant level or at the delivery level, a lot of restaurants like to do their prep fresh before they, and there's, the controls at the local level have to be very stringent in order to prevent, contamination by, the local service. And
Yep.
laboratories obviously are not going to be able to help you there because there aren't any labs, at that level, the service level. So maybe you can let us know a little bit about, what roles do laboratory and quality professionals play in maintaining the safety standards in the food supply.
Well, like you said at the beginning, the laboratory professionals are really the last line of defense in ensuring the food safety and quality. They play a really important role because they collect and prepare food samples for testing. That can include cutting, grinding, homogenizing the sample with the help of homogenizers. Some of the methods include sensory testing. You look at something, sometimes you can look at it and know it's bad, or smell it, it's bad. But then there's chemical analysis, microbiological analysis, and also physical testing. So the lab needs to maintain track of the samples and store the data from the analysis in a repository we call a LIMS. And that's used to report and interpret results. And also during that process, there's second and third steps for validation and verification that the work that was performed indeed makes sense and that the products fulfill the quality requirements.
So when you're involved in implementation on LIMS, and people will set limits on some of their analyses. We know a certain outcome will stimulate some type of an alert. Is that something that you commonly do when you're going through your implementations?
Yeah, pretty much always. I mean, that's one of the most important thing, because every product will have limits on how much of each pathogen can be in the product, how much contamination from things like lead and other contaminants. So traceability is really important.
Okay. And so you have like flags that will pop up. And what's the level of automation there when something say, you get a result that's outside the norm? What have clients asked of you as far as like notifications and things like that?
Well, there's several levels of notification. For example, the person who's doing the data input, if it's manually input, they'll get flagged. Things will turn red and let them know that there's something wrong here. In addition, those kind of limit comparisons can also send messages out to the plant, either as emails or text messages, so that you can get an immediate response and stop the process. For pathogen testing and microbiology testing, sometimes companies will ship the product before that testing can be completed.
Right.
And so during the delivery process, things can be stopped during the transportation process if they find that there's a pathogen that exists in the product.
Right. And that, I know with microbiology, my background is obviously microbiology, but I know that's always a real problem because, the methods take time.
Yeah.
And the faster you can do an analysis and get the answer out to the production guys, then they know maybe that certain lot should be set aside. But I would, in my experience, the vast majority of lots, pass.
Yeah.
And the sooner you can get that information out and move it move that lot out of storage and into the, your flow of your commercial flow and getting the food out there. The faster you can do that, obviously, the better. So you
Right.
mentioned traceability, and obviously for any kind of especially legally defensible data that you'll be producing in a laboratory, maybe you can talk a little bit about traceability and, especially how it relates to LIMS.
Sure. Well, globalization of the food supply chain not only increases the availability of a more variety of foods, but it also increases the number of pathogens that consumers can be exposed to because they're coming from places all over the world. The FDA reports that there are 5 times more pathogens identified today than there were 50 years ago. Traceability of each product from raw material through production and packaging means that more laboratory technology in the field will be necessary to monitor these processes. And if you look at the food processors, they're responsible for producing detailed and accurate records that identify the quality, quantity, disposition, and handling of the products at each handover point. So there's testing involved all along the way. Raw material testing and identity verification of each handover point is critical to the traceability and quality management.
And Wayne, let me just stop you there for a minute and ask you this question. So again, when you're setting up implementation at, you're at a facility that is, making whatever, cakes or whatever, is there a way of tracing all the different ingredients, right? So a manufacturer is going to have all these different sources of these key ingredients that go into a product. How is that handled in a LIMS, being able to look back and see what was used for what, if you will?
Well, within the LIMS, you can identify all the ingredients that go into a manufactured product. So if there was a raw material or an additive or something like that that introduced the contamination, you can then find out all other products that were made that included that ingredient, so you can trace it back to the supply and the source, so that you can stop anything in the middle that happened to be using that particular item.
Okay. And then as far as the laboratory is concerned, you could also apply that, because in the lab you need to track standards, reagents, things like that are used.
Yeah, and even the people who touched the product too. It could be the human contamination as well.
Exactly, and track all those things. Okay, all right.
Yeah, and the LIMS keeps track of who did what and when, so you can always know the time, the date, and the user who did something. So,
all right, excellent. Okay, any other points on traceability you'd like to hit upon?
yeah, like a food and beverage manufacturer might use an FTIR to show that the dry ingredients are unadulterated. For beverages with sugar added, you have HPLC that confirms that fructose has not been diluted by the supplier. Water could be tested for pesticides using GC mass spec, cyanide using ion chromatography. So these and there are many other tests and results that are transmitted to the LIMS automatically ensure the data integrity. And the automated transfer of data is important too, because it's one less step for human error, typographical errors, and so on and so forth. So the LIMS then provides the platform to process, store, analyze, and transmit this information to relevant decision makers throughout the company.
Right. Now you're talking about parser communication between instrumentation and the LIMS.
Right.
What's your experience with that in general, especially with more modern analytical? Compare that with maybe someone that might have some older equipment. What are some of the challenges you've run into in having LIMS and instruments speak to one another?
Well, a lot of the challenges have gone away as instrument manufacturers become more sophisticated. And as it turns out, the instruments are putting out more data. So the more data that comes from the instruments and the less human interaction, the better. Because if an instrument comes out, let's say a GC mass spec, and you have 75 components that are reported, think about typing that in 75 times. It's 75 chances for something to go wrong.
All the errors,
Whereas if it gets transferred directly from the instrument, not only does it save occurs, but it also saves a lot of time and makes you more efficient. So instrument automation is a real key. Same thing, Rick, with interactions between ERP systems and the LIMS, because the ERP
Right.
will let you know what the ingredients were that went into it. And it, again, it adds efficiency, but also accuracy.
Right. Right. And then, of course, if the company, wants to integrate how it accesses LIMS data with maybe, a company-based software that everyone is using, and, people want to have access to the data within the company.
Rick, with cloud-based applications, anybody can get at the data as long as they're permitted to. So the information is ubiquitous throughout an organization. And the more information you have, the better decisions you can make and the safer your products can be.
Okay. All right. So I have a final question here, final topic to hit upon is, we've seen these increases in recalls. What can the food and beverage manufacturers do to maybe quickly adjust to some of these public safety concerns, address regulatory changes, and especially the risks that they seem to face now in a more timely manner? How do they go about dealing with that?
Well, because they're now collecting an enormous amount of data, it increases the stress placed on the quality control procedures in the lab. This increases the need for the right technology partner to increase the efficiency, accuracy of the laboratory workflows and make the data more accessible. And also, there are tools now that can help interpret the data. Sometimes looking at data isn't enough. Looking at trends becomes really important. And the technology partner should be able to allow you to do that. And a lot of LIMS providers have not evolved to meet the needs of labs over the past 30 years. And the result is a heavily fragmented industry with customized solutions for specific testing methods, but not a one-size-fits-all approach that scales as the laboratory grows.
Right, right. Yeah, I like that point. I like that point you were making very much about trending, right? Because sometimes you work in a lab and this is what I'm working on today, and this is what I'll be working on tomorrow. You want to be able to track those things again automatically, so it's not just when you get a bad result, but maybe when you start drifting, can you capture the drift that might be happening so that you don't get to a critical point where something is turning red, right?
Yeah, there's statistical tools built into some of the software packages where as things start trending in one direction or another, or whether they're varying up and down, can cause flags that should alarm people with respect to the manufacturing process.
Right. Yeah, and even just environmental monitoring. If you are running ovens and incubators or water baths or anything like that, where you need to be carefully tracking temperatures, and you might be able to, before you see an absolute failure of a device, say an incubator that just has been slowly trending in one direction, you can set yellow flags that let you know that, hey, somebody needs to look at this, and not wait for just a complete failure of the device,
right,
or something along those lines.
Right. So you got to supply people with tools that can be configured to meet the needs of the laboratory.
Right. All right. Well, Wayne, I want to thank you for meeting with us today, sharing your insights with our audience, and to our attendees, thank you very much for tuning in to this session from start to finish. At Confience, they are driven by the mission to provide automated lab management and data for the customers that they can act on to build trusted products and a thriving planet. If you enjoyed this episode, you can stay up to date on this and future recordings by following our LinkedIn company page. Drop us a like, a comment, or share your thoughts on topics you would like to see us cover in this series. We'd love to hear from you. So if you want to learn more about how to streamline operations, improve quality standards in your lab, Please request the demo at www.confiance.io. Next time, I'm Rick Danielson, and have
I'm
a
Wayne.
great rest of your day. Thank
All
you,
right,
Wayne.
bye-bye.